Hello and welcome to study 18 of our series on Joseph, son of Jacob. The brothers now know that Joseph was the vizier. It was him they've been talking to all along. He's the second in command in all of Egypt. Now, it appears the shock, though, of finding out has still not worn off, as you'll see. Joseph now reveals a plan to them, which might just show he has been thinking about this day, possibly for a long time. His brothers had changed, and Joseph was seeking to renew their relationship. Now we'll see that there was something else that Joseph has been longing for, to see his father again. So this is Genesis 45, verses 8 through 15. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now, hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. Now, what do you think that Joseph means by being a father to Pharaoh? Now, obviously, he's not being literal here. One of his children didn't become Pharaoh. MacArthur and Hinton believe it was a title that belonged to viziers, a title of honor given to other high officials, which also appears, by the way, not just in the Bible now, but in the Apocrypha. And in particular, it appears in the book of the Maccabees. Now, MacArthur makes another interesting point here. He believes Joseph served under more than one Pharaoh. Very possible. I mean, Joseph was there a while. And he believes the second one was younger. Now, when you look at history, there's a point in history where, well, MacArthur could be right here. So that may also be another reason this title was used. At this point, Joseph, by the way, is 39 years old. How many years have passed? 22 years. 22 years before he was sold into slavery. So quite a bit of time had passed in our story, which, if you remember, started when Joseph was 17 years old. Now, Joseph wants to send his father at once. I mean, he is very anxious to see him, as we saw in verses 9 and 13. Well, it's been 22 years. Because of the great authority he has, he is able to find a place in Egypt that would be quite suitable to them. Now remember, they were shepherds primarily, and well, they couldn't grow crops for the next 5 years anyway because of the famine. So Joseph chooses the land of Goshen for them. Now, this was a usually fertile region in the eastern part of the Nile Delta, and MacArthur points out that Jews still lived in Goshen 400 years later at the time of Exodus. Joseph is making a good point here. They can't stay where they are much longer. It had been a difficult 2 years with them having to go down to Egypt twice already, but things were going to get from bad here to worse. And Goshen, in the land of Canaan where they were living. So Joseph feared they would become destitute if they did. Now the Zondervan Study Bible makes an obvious but a very good point in verse 12. Joseph says, you can see that it is I who am speaking with you. Now, it seems to me they may have looked puzzled or unsettled. They still weren't grasping everything, I think. Now, obviously, they spoke a different language than the Egyptians, and Joseph's kind of pointing out the interpreter's not here, right? He's speaking to them in their native language. Remember, he sent everyone out of the room. So it really was him who was speaking to them in Hebrew. He wanted his father to come and ask to tell them the honor that he had been given here in the land of Egypt. And I think this was to help persuade Jacob to leave the land of Canaan. Tell him about everything you've seen, he said. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin, and he wept, something that we know Joseph did quite frequently. He was an emotional person, and this is an emotional story. Logic now, it's out the window again, and the emotions of the moment flooded back. He kissed all his brothers, and he wept over them as well. The cry fest was back on. Joseph kind of let his emotions take over. And you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes that's a good thing for us. MacArthur makes a point we need to consider here. Joseph held no grudges, and he forgave his brothers. He was very spiritually mature. He had a great understanding of God at work, God being at work in everything. So forgiving wasn't as hard then. See, because he saw God in everything, the good and the bad, forgiving was easy for him. Now, forgiving may not be easy for you, but maybe you and I need to start seeing God in more things so that we can be as forgiving as Joseph was. God had been at work, and now it was time to finally get his family into a safe and thriving place and rescue them from this long famine. And at the end of this reading, and it's an important sentence, I think, we read, his brothers talked with him. Now, the Zondervan Study Bible makes it clear that they felt it was an intimate fellowship and friendship, that kind of conversation. There was no more hostility, which is what had happened in Joseph's younger days. There was no more fear, which would happen when they visited him as vizier. For the first time now, in a long time, they just sat down and talked. Their relationship had started all over again. This was a new day. Now, let's finish our reading for today. That's 45, still chapter 45, verses 16 through 20. I hope Sandy will get that phone. That was bound to happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, by the way, in there. That phone normally means it's a junk call. 16 through 20 is what I'm going to be reading. Now, when the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." You are also directed to tell them, do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all of Egypt will be yours. Pretty cool reading, isn't it? Really like that. Now our attention is turned to Pharaoh. Now remember, Pharaoh was the first in command. Joseph certainly had a position where he could make plans of his own, but the writer wants us to hear from Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh and his officials were pleased that Joseph's brothers had come, which to me, again, is an indication that they really did care about him. And I don't think that can be stated enough. Pharaoh asked them to load their animals and bring back their father and their families. So all their children were welcome, all their wives were welcome. Everyone was welcome in Egypt, and Pharaoh wanted them to know that. He was going to give them the best of the land. And he used a very interesting phrase, so you can enjoy the fat of the land. Now, this is very significant. You see, long ago, their father Jacob was blessed by his father Isaac, and Isaac told him he would live off the fat of the land. So now, he was even going to be able to do that in Egypt, not talking about Canaan now. He was going to live off the fat of the land in Egypt. God was at work through the words of the Pharaoh. God can speak through anyone, by the way, so you and I need to listen for that. But Pharaoh did more than just put his seal of approval on the situation, as MacArthur says. He wanted them to take carts from Egypt for their wives and their children. Best of Egypt would be theirs. Now, isn't it amazing how God works things out in this story? It really is. Now, we're going to finish this chapter tomorrow as we read about the brothers' journey back to the land of Canaan. What would Jacob say? Now, remember, the brothers had to tell him Joseph was alive. Now, this was going to be a shock to their father. How would he react? Well, we'll see next time. Till then, God bless you and be well.